They called my name for a tech briefing same day my trailer roof caved in from desert wind. Marlene Beck. Valve inspector known for silence and black coffee. Smelled burnt wires, saw the old wrench glint under flickering fluorescence, and knew this wasn't just another shift. Ever felt like your past clocked in before you did? Nobody noticed when Marlene Beck walked in. Just the quiet shuffle of boots and the familiar smell of engine grease followed her. Jake's diner was already humming at half volume when she pushed the door open. The bell gave a dry clang as she entered, but no heads turned. She moved the same way every morning, direct quiet, always to the far end of the counter, where the napkin holder wobbled slightly and the coffee pot was within arm's reach. She slid into her usual seat. Jake didn't ask what she wanted. A black mug appeared beside her elbow, steaming. No sugar, no cream, just the way she liked it. The same way she'd liked it since before they replaced the switchboard at Site 6 with a touchscreen. The coffee tasted vaguely of burnt toast and rusted percolator, but she drank it like it was fine wine. Slowly. No rush. Behind her a booth creaked. Kara's voice floated over half whisper, half aimless commentary. She live alone or what? Doesn't even nod at people. Bert grunted something back too low to catch, but enough to earn a laugh. Marlene didn't flinch. Her hand curled around the mug, the heat settling into her glove through the thin knit. The window fogged slightly where her breath hit the glass. Outside, the light was climbing across the street, hitting the crooked sign at the Los Carneros post office. Mr. Max stood beside his aging Buick. The hood popped like a worn-out jaw. He tapped the front bumper with the toe of his shoe, then again, then gave it a gentle, exasperated kick. Marlene stood, left exact change plus a tip tucked under the sugar jar. She walked past Kara's booth like a breeze might quiet, unnoticed by anyone but the napkin she set fluttering as she passed. Outside, she paused at the car. Max was still coaxing the key in the ignition. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said without looking. She didn't reply. Instead, she moved to the rear of the Buick, crouched briefly to glance at the undercarriage, then leaned her shoulder into the trunk. Her gloves creaked against the cold metal. Max raised an eyebrow as the car lurched forward. The engine coughed, then caught. Marlene gave the trunk a final push, then stepped back. Max stuck his head out the window, a ghost of a grin twitching. "Still got it," he muttered, then tipped 2 fingers to his temple. Marlene gave a faint nod and turned down the sidewalk without a word. At Site 6, the day had begun with the familiar thump of boots and hiss of compressors. The bulletin board beside the break room had already drawn a cluster of workers all squinting at the new rotation printout like it might bite. Eli Tennyson stood among them, trying to look like he belonged. His uniform still creased in places, boots too new. His dad had been a field mechanic in Iowa, never let the boy near a live wire. Now Eli was here scanning names with hopeful uncertainty. Beside him, Kara tapped the paper with the back of a pen. "Look at that. She's back on valve 4B. Bert leaned in. "Maybe it's haunted and she talks to it." Eli followed the line down the page. His name sat beside hers. M. Beck, E. Tennyson. He blinked. "Why me?" he asked softly. No one answered. Later in the break room, the smell of powdered creamer mixed with motor oil. Marlene sat alone at the far table, her lunchbox unopened, hands folded over it. Her gloves looked older than the vending machine. Eli poured himself half a cup of coffee and tried not to spill. Kara nudged him. "Watch your tools tomorrow," she said with a smirk. "She hoards torque wrenches. Probably sleeps with them." He offered a tight smile but said nothing. In Bay 2, Marlene crouched near a pressure line, checking calibration with the ease of someone who knew the machinery like an old friend. Her posture was firm but relaxed, the line of her back straight, even as she twisted the socket wrench in a fluid arc. No wasted motion, each adjustment precise. Eli walked past the open bay door and slowed. He didn't say anything, just watched. The way she moved, confident, efficient, like her body remembered things she hadn't told anyone, made him suddenly unsure of the quiet jokes he'd half laughed at earlier. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridgeline, casting long orange fingers through the dirty window panes, Marlene had finished her round. She cleaned her tools meticulously, wiped the grease from each joint, then locked them away in her red steel box. Back in her corner of the floor, she paused. A small slip of paper was tucked under the edge of her toolbox. White printed clean, the edges square. Her name, a valve assignment, a time, paired with E. Tennyson, Gen Valve 4B0800. She sighed once, then filed it away. The first thing Eli noticed wasn't her voice, it was how her tools were laid out, like she'd been trained to assemble satellites. Each wrench socket and probe rested on a soft blue cloth in perfect spacing, like a field surgeon's tray in a war movie. Even the battered voltmeter looked like it had been placed for ceremony, not convenience. Marlene Beck didn't look up as he approached. She just tightened the strap on her gloves and tilted her chin toward the valve housing. The desert morning was warming up fast, but the wind still carried a bite. Valve Station 4B stood like a forgotten relic bolted into a concrete pad beside a squat generator shack. Its casing was rust-kissed and buzzed faintly like it had secrets. The open yard around them felt hollow, too wide, too quiet, and too exposed. No one else from Site 6 had wandered this far out. Eli rubbed his hands together once, then reached into the storage bin for gloves. As he pulled on the oversized pair, Kara's voice echoed in his memory, thin and teasing from earlier that morning. "You drew the ghost shift, rookie," she'd smirked, tossing him a field tablet on her way out. "Hope you know Morse." Marlene moved with silent certainty. She unlatched the service panel and let it groan open. The hinges protested with a screech that startled a bird from a nearby post. She reached into the dark tangle of wires with bare hands, her gloves tucked into a back pocket now. Eli winced as she guided her fingers past the jagged lip of the panel, like it was a familiar handshake. He activated the diagnostic screen. Numbers blinked, then stalled. The air filled with the faint static hum of the exposed wiring and the dry crunch of dust shifting underfoot. "Line inputs not stabilizing," he said mostly to himself. Marlene didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a narrow coil of wire from her bag, bit one end to strip it, and began wrapping it into a loop. She lit the joint with a small torch from her belt pouch, fusing the connection in a quick burst of heat. "You're not following the procedure," Eli said softly. She didn't look up. "I am the procedure." He hesitated, then crouched beside her, holding the tablet at an angle so she could read it if she chose to. He adjusted the brightness, tried to ignore the awkward stiffness in his knees, the dryness of his throat. She didn't glance at the screen, just reached toward the panel again. Her left sleeve caught briefly on the edge. As she pulled forward, the fabric slid back. Eli's light followed her wrist and froze. Just beneath her skin, near the inner forearm, something gleamed. Round, slightly raised. Not a watch, not a scar. Not natural. It looked like metal, embedded, almost soldered in place. He stared, his breath hitching. Marlene didn't react. She closed the panel with a quiet click and reached for the spanner. "Is that metal?" he asked, more breath than voice. She glanced at him, once her eyes unreadable beneath the brim of her cap. "Leave the diagnostics open," she said. "It cools faster." They finished the task in silence. When they returned to the Site 6 main lot, Marlene peeled away toward her corner toolbox, in hand boots, slow but even. Eli lingered near the gate, tapping the edge of the tablet against his leg, heart still fluttering in a rhythm he didn't quite understand. That night, long after the desert had cooled, and the wind had returned with its dry whisper, Eli sat at the foot of his bed, the glow of his phone casting sharp shadows on the walls of his small trailer. He typed slowly, deliberately. Military Embedded Commendation Medal, forearm. The search engine loaded, then paused. 3 links. 1 broken. The others vague, half-archived news clippings with dates blurred out and images that wouldn't load. He tapped the screen again. Nothing. He stared at the nearly empty results page. That night, Eli replays the scene in his head. A Google search for military embedded commendation leaves him staring at a nearly empty results page. General Wade Huxley didn't believe in ghosts until he saw one holding a wrench at Site 6. The morning report blinked into his inbox at 06:23, just as the convoy cleared the outskirts of Las Palomas. The desert ahead was still silver with frost, the brush stiff and glinting in the early light. He held the tablet flat in one hand, thumb scrolling past status pings and valve maintenance summaries. Most were green. One wasn't. Valve 4B stabilized by M. Beck. No tablet log. Huxley's eyes narrowed. His grip on the stylus tightened the scar behind his ear, itching like a whisper from the past. Lieutenant Harris, he said without turning. A shuffling of paper, sir. Get me to Site 6 quietly. Yes, sir. No further questions. Harris was new, and for now that was an asset. The command vehicle banked left at the next turn, the tires crunching over frost-bitten gravel. The fencing at Site 6 loomed into view, chain link laced with old sandbags, a crooked gate held together by habit and rust. A windsock flapped half-heartedly near the top of the communications pole. Through the window, Huxley caught a flash of movement. A figure in gray gloves crouched beside a fuel manifold. The angle of the elbow, the way her shoulders squared before every adjustment, hair tucked beneath a faded cap. She turned slightly, revealing only the edge of her face. His breath caught, just for a moment. The vehicle rolled to a stop. He didn't exit, just stared, unmoving, as the figure stood, wiped her hands against her thighs, and walked toward Bay 2. Sir Harris asked, "Stay here." Back in the mobile archive trailer, Huxley stood before the terminal alone. The interface chirped awake the familiar hum of encryption, unlocking a decade's worth of sealed files. He tapped in the key phrases manually. Bright glass. KIA. Beck Marlene. The screen blinked. Status confirmed. KIA Field Engineer Class 4. Last known location FOB Ansel Sector 9. Commendation embedded. Body not recovered. The cursor blinked. He opened the attached media logs. 12 years ago. Fog and fire. Frame after frame showed little. Charred metal, a scorched tarp, and then in one grainy still, a silhouette in the smoke hauling another figure by the collar. The backdrop flickered with heat distortions, but the lines were unmistakable. The stance, the strength. He paused the image, dragged it side by side with the still frame from that morning's surveillance, Marlene turning a pressure valve with practiced ease. He zoomed in. The shoulders matched. So did the elbow angle. Even the way her boot tipped outward just slightly on her right foot, favoring an old injury. He knew that stance. He'd watched it pull him out of burning rubble once long ago. Huxley leaned back, throat tight. Outside, the wind scraped along the trailer siding like breath against tin. He sat down, tapped the screen again. Another photo appeared. A crew shot. 7 figures in dusty field fatigues. M. Beck stood second from the left, her hair shorter, her eyes the same. Someone had scribbled "Grease Ghost" under her name in faded ink. She had died 2 weeks later according to the file. Only now she hadn't. Not really. Behind him, Harris rustled a file too loudly. Huxley didn't turn. He stared at the photo, then at the live feed of Site 6 where the figure in gray gloves walked back into frame, toolbox in hand. His hand brushed the edge of the monitor. She had saved him. Once. Then vanished into the system like so many others, filed away, forgotten, declared gone. But ghosts don't hold wrenches. They don't file maintenance slips, and they don't leave red flags in military logs. He whispered almost to himself, "She's not dead." Then added quieter, "She saved me. 12 years ago they marked her dead. Today a stranger handed her a folder with her name still breathing inside it. The folder was soft from time and desert air. Manila edges, curled corners, brittle. Mr. Max held it with both hands, like it might slip into dust if he wasn't careful. He'd come to her trailer unannounced, shuffling down the gravel, with a slowness that felt deliberate. The sun hung low behind him, casting long, tired shadows across the sand. "I wasn't supposed to have this," he said, offering it out like a peace branch. "But I know that name. Thought you ought to see it." Marlene looked at it for a long beat, then reached out, took it without speaking. Someone shoved it deep in the back of the postal archive. Wrong file drawer, maybe. Or maybe not. He smiled soft around the eyes, then turned and left before she could reply. Inside the trailer was dim. The wind scraped the outer walls like distant memory. She sat at the small kitchenette table folder, unopened coffee reheating in a tin pot beside her. She didn't move for a long while, just stared at her name typed in old ink across the label. Beck M., Commendation Unit 14, classified debrief pending. When she finally peeled it open, the air felt heavier. One sheet, dated, signed but never sent. A field-level commendation for action under fire. She skimmed the lines, eyes catching phrases she knew by heart. Extracted under duress, structural collapse. Imminent evacuation, completed by Field Eng. Beck. No mention of the person pulled from the rubble. Just code and silence. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing grit against the steps. Across town, General Huxley sat in the glow of his command cabin terminal. The interface flickered with resistance, old files behind old locks. But he'd built half of these encryption trees himself. If anyone could navigate their routes, it was him. Operation Bright Glass, he muttered, fingers clicking through gateways. There it was. Mission summary. Coordinates. Evac time. Status 1 survivor. Field engineer presumed KIA. Identity match pending M. Beck. Embedded commendation activated posthumously. His jaw tightened. He tapped again. The screen hesitated, then gave way to a grainy clip marked Incident Debrief. Segment 3. Smoke. Flashing red. A half-buried convoy vehicle on its side, flames curling along the wheels. A figure helmeted small, pulling someone free. The body slumped, then steadied. The camera shook. Light flared. Faces blurred. But the gait, the shape, the strength. It was her. Again. He leaned back in his chair, lips parted slightly. The cold air in the cabin did nothing to ease the pressure in his chest. At that same moment on the edge of town, Marlene sat on her trailer steps, coffee cradled in both hands. Her gloves were off. The wind nipped at her sleeves. Eli arrived hesitantly, holding a soldering tip wrapped in a cloth napkin. Didn't want to leave it in the locker, he said, offering it like something sacred. She nodded, took it, and set it beside her boot, without fuss. He lingered, then sat beside her. They didn't speak at first. The silence wasn't awkward, just full. Finally, Eli said, "Was my dad like you?" She sipped once, let the warmth sit in her mouth. "Better," she said. "He didn't have to vanish." They sat like that for a while longer, the night inching forward. Somewhere nearby, a screen door slammed. A dog barked twice, then quieted. Inside, her toolbox sat open on the counter. Each tool gleamed in its place, not a millimeter out of line. Back at the cabin, Huxley pulled up one more file. A log from the day after the attack. His signature at the bottom. Beck M. Status changed to KIA. Recovery deemed unfeasible. Clearance closed. His own initials stamped clean. He whispered, barely audible, "I signed off on her death, and she's the reason I'm still here." The schedule said technical briefing by M. Beck, 0900. Most thought it was a joke. Some thought it was a typo. Nobody expected her to show up. By 8:45, the folding chairs in Generator Bay 3 were half occupied, their metal legs creaking as boots shifted and backs leaned cautiously. Someone had wheeled in the old projector, the kind with a finicky HDMI cable and one color permanently skewed too green. It whirred with the kind of anxiety only outdated machines know. Near the back wall, a tray of pumpkin muffins sat beside a dented coffee urn. The brew inside was already lukewarm and smelled vaguely burnt. Kara Wilkes leaned toward Bert and whispered, "What's the over-under? She even says a word." Bert didn't answer. He just kept chewing on his pen cap, eyes squinting toward the front, where a small field table stood empty. On the chalkboard behind them, 2 lines were scrawled in half-legible script. Critical bypass, no manual access. Instructor, M. Beck. Eli sat alone in the second row, elbows on knees, hands clasped. He'd worn his clean shirt, the one with the collar that never sat flat. At exactly 9 Hoshamers, Marlene entered. No one saw her arrive. She just appeared, moving from the side door to the front, like a shadow made solid. Gray gloves in one hand, a folded schematic in the other. No clipboard. No laptop. She placed the diagram on the table, unfolded it with care, then turned to face them. No projector needed. In a quiet voice that carried more than volume ever could, she began. "This is the contingency map for Generator 3's blackout failover," she said. "The digital panel won't help if the primary coupler shorts. You'll need this." She gestured to the bypass lines marked in blue ink. A few in the crowd leaned forward, surprised by the simplicity and the clarity. Eli watched her hands as she traced the map. No hesitation. No wasted motion. "This configuration was used during the 2011 Delta fire," she continued. "No manual existed then either." Someone coughed. A chair scraped. Kara raised a hand. "Didn't wait to be called on. This isn't regulation." Marlene didn't flinch. Neither was the battlefield. A silence followed that had nothing to do with acoustics. She reached for her sleeve, paused for half a breath, then rolled it back slowly. The overhead light caught it just right, a metallic glint embedded near the forearm, small, round, unmistakably official. Whispers rippled across the room. Someone dropped their muffin. Eli stopped breathing. In the back, General Huxley stepped forward. His presence had gone unnoticed until that moment. He removed his cap, eyes steady. 12 years ago, he said, voice even, she pulled me out of fire. I thought she died that day. I was wrong. No one moved. Even the projector fell silent, its fan finally giving up. Marlene looked down at the map again, as if the revelation had been someone else's. I didn't want medals, she said softly. I just wanted to keep fixing what was broken. No applause. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the ticking sound of a clock no one had ever set correctly. Huxley turned to face the group, his voice low but clear. Let's give her a title that actually fits. Marlene's face stayed blank. Her eyes said otherwise. She didn't ask for the plaque on her bench or the nameplate, but someone made it anyway. It was bolted in place with care not show. Brushed steel sanded corners. The letters read clean and without flourish. Senior Technical Advisor, M. Beck. No signature, no dedication. Just acknowledgement, wordless and whole. Marlene found it early just after dawn, the day after cleanup crews had packed away the last folding tables from the base's Thanksgiving potluck. Her gloves were still damp from rinsing coffee urns when she stepped outside and saw the sun catch the nameplate. She stood for a long moment silent. She didn't touch it. Inside the Site 6 workshop, the air carried the familiar scent of solvent and warm wiring, but something quieter had settled in, like furniture finally moved to the right corners. On the long work table, a new thermos sat without a label. It wasn't hers, but it was placed where she always sat. A sticky note was taped to the lid with handwriting she didn't recognize. One word, heat. That morning, Kara came in late carrying a box of signal relays and 2 coffees. One she placed on the back table. The other, without eye contact, she placed on Marlene's bench. I figured. You take yours, Black, Kara muttered. Marlene gave a slow nod. That was it. No apology, no rehashing, just a gesture. Eli had been at the bench since before Marlene arrived, sleeves rolled and circuits half dissected. His notebook was open beside him, annotated in careful block letters. When she walked by, he sat up straighter. Morning, he said, voice steadier now than weeks before. She handed him a replacement switch he didn't ask for. You'll need this once you bridge terminals B and D, she said. He blinked, then smiled. It was the rhythm of a new routine, one that didn't need to be defined out loud. The clank of tools, the dry humor in the way someone offered a clean rag, even the squeak of the old radio when it caught the tail end of a country tune. All of it became part of a pattern they no longer questioned. Later that afternoon, Mr. Max Lindsley dropped by with Otis Rayburn, another old-timer from the VFW hall. Otis carried a dented tin of peanut brittle and wore a camouflage windbreaker with the cuffs frayed clean through. The two of them leaned on the doorframe like it was part of their weekly loop. Thought we'd check on our favorite field ghost, Max said, grinning. Marlene offered them stools, but neither sat. They didn't linger either, just left the tin behind and told her to eat before the kids got to it. As the sun tilted toward the mountains, the workshop grew quieter. Eli was rewiring a distribution node with unspoken precision, his soldering lines straighter than they used to be. He kept glancing at Marlene, not out of uncertainty anymore, but looking for confirmation. She finally walked over, reviewed his work without a word, then reached over to correct one wire's tension with her index finger. Almost, she said. Eli exhaled, adjusted, and the green diagnostic light flickered on. That night, Jake's diner was dimmer than usual, holiday lights taped along the windows. No music played, just the clink of cutlery and the hum of an old ceiling fan. Marlene took her usual corner booth, but this time she wasn't alone in the room. Bert gave her a nod from the counter. Kara passed by with a smile so slight it might have been imagined. The waitress brought her pumpkin pie without asking. When Marlene reached for her check, the waitress tapped her hand lightly and whispered, "Already paid." said to thank you for the lights staying on last week." She looked around, but no one made eye contact. Back outside, the bench caught the last of the day's warmth. She sat down slowly, easing into it, like someone who was finally allowed to keep their own seat. Her gloves lay across her lap, untouched. Wind pushed dry leaves across the gravel, the sky purpling into night. Eli arrived not long after. He carried the same notebook he'd brought every day for a week, but had never dared to open in front of her. This time he sat and cracked it without hesitation. He didn't speak for a long while. Then, "Do you think stories like yours ever get told right?" he asked. Marlene looked out over the compound, the low buildings, the hum of idle machinery, the soft gleam of sodium lights. "Only by those who keep listening when it's quiet," she said. They stayed that way, the cold seeping in, slow but not unkind. A breeze stirred and Eli shrugged his jacket tighter. Marlene didn't move. From the workshop's side door, 3 young techs emerged, 2 holding notebooks, 1 a coil of cabling. They paused when they spotted her on the bench, silhouettes caught between motion and memory. One of them gave a nod, nervous but certain. They walked over, sat down in silence. No projector, no screen, no signal bell. Just the gentle settling of weight on a bench built for more than one. Just a shared, wordless agreement that sometimes the best briefings begin without a single instruction. And the beginning of something that didn't need a name. Even in the quiet hum of a small-town workshop, some silences carry the weight of stories waiting to be heard. Marlene Beck never asked for recognition, but her steady hands, worn boots, and quiet grace told a history louder than medals ever could. Sometimes kindness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It walks in slowly, fixes what's broken, and leaves behind a trace of dignity. When we pause long enough to look past assumptions, we often find strength wrapped in stillness and loyalty tucked beneath silence. And like a wrench left on a warm bench, the simplest gestures, offering coffee, a place to sit, a name remembered, can turn into monuments of quiet gratitude. If this story reminded you of someone you once knew or once were, perhaps it's time to reach out. Listen a little longer or thank someone still showing up when nobody else does.